I met Tristan a few years ago, several years ago actually, when I was an editor at Newsweek. And Tristan, I think, had just finished.
I was like 22 years old.
He was very young. I was only 5, but right. But I think you had just finished at Stanford when we first met, and he was working. Right, he was working on a kind of news product aggregation. You were an entrepreneur at that point, and now you're an ethicist in technology. Just give us a brief sense of how you made that transition from thinking about creating products to thinking about these larger questions of how technology affects us.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right, I guess. So I used to be a technology entrepreneur. We started a small news multimedia explainer company. It was bought by Google. And I came about in the tech entrepreneurship world the same period as all the social media products. So my friends in college started Instagram. That was the sort of wave of innovation that we were part of. We were all the sort of same class, basically, at Stanford. And after we got acquired by Google, I started asking this question because I noticed that less and less of the technology around me in Silicon Valley was being developed to help people, and more was about grabbing attention. How many of you how many of you have children that you're worried about how technology is affecting their attention? Yeah, okay. So that kind of topic, and how many of you feel like you're constantly addicted to checking either your email or Twitter or Facebook, and you pull to refresh and then you pull to refresh again, right? Okay. So, so that's this ubiquitous new human experience that every single one of us is now kind of trapped inside of. And we like to say with our organization, which I'll get to it, but the problem statement of humanity, we steal from E.O. Wilson, who's a famous sociobiologist. The problem of humanity is we now have Paleolithic emotions, meaning we have ancient Stone Age brains, emotions. We have medieval institutions, and we have accelerating godlike technology. So our Paleolithic emotions, like a slot machine, it feels really good to do that pull to refresh on Twitter and see if you got more likes and see if you got more mentions and see if you got more email. And that's just addictive. You don't get to choose whether your brain responds that way. It works that way. And when I was at Stanford, I was a lab called the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab. Has anybody here heard of that lab by chance? Persuasive Technology Lab? So there's a professor named B.J. Fogg that taught many students, including many of the early people who went on to be at Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and Uber. The entire field of growth hacking kind of fell out of how do we influence people's attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Can you help people form habits, ideally for good? So the idea was this is not some kind of evil lab. Could we help people work out more? Could we help people eat better? Could we help people live up to their dreams and their goals? But when I was at Google, a year into being acquired, I got really concerned that basically everyone around me was building technology to use these techniques to manipulate people's attention, keep them addicted to technology, the side effects being weakening of relationships, more social isolation, more teenage mental health issues. And then on the information side, automating where human attention goes. So that's like news feeds, things like that, fake news.
So that's a deliberate decision by tech companies to do that. But did they understand at that point when you were seeing this, the larger consequences of that?
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. So this is in 2013. People weren't really asking, is this good for people?
Right.
This is just asking, how do we get attention? Right? And so it's sort of we call it the race at the bottom of the brainstem because you're in a win-lose game. If I don't get your attention that way with filters, likes, comments, shares, then the other guy will. So if I don't do it, he will. It's like autonomous weapons. Like I shouldn't build them. No one wants to build autonomous weapons. But if I say I won't, but I think you're still going to do it, so I'm going to keep building them anyway. And you're going to keep building them anyway, and then we'll get into this escalating war. So that's happening with technology and attention. And after this, I made a presentation at Google, basically sounding the alarm, and became a design ethicist at Google, studying how do you ethically influence 2 billion people's attention, because there's this inadvertent fallout or sort of social harm that emerges from the natural design.
Right. So we wanted to start this conversation today about harnessing new technologies with this chat with Tristan, because I think it lays the groundwork for what companies like IBM and others, Novartis, others who will be speaking with us today have to be thinking about, and I know are thinking about, as they build their products. You testified before the U.S. Congress not too long ago. I was struck by an observation you made, which I hadn't really thought about, but essentially you made the argument that we're creating this vast information data infrastructure that's, virtual, but it is an infrastructure. And really in no other case, like the electrical grid or nuclear plants or nuclear weapons capabilities, there's no other infrastructure where there isn't someone watching what's going on and protecting consumers. We expect food to be safe when we go to the supermarket. We expect the nuclear plant down the road to have protocols if there's some sort of accident. But that's not what is happening with this virtual infrastructure, is it?
Yeah, so the first point you're making is that technology used to be these little products that we use. Each of us started by building companies, building products, and those products grow, and then we get more and more users. And so we're used to the world of let's make those products more and more successful, let's make them more and more engaging, let's do all that. But suddenly, you do that for a while, and you're Facebook, and you have 2.7 billion users, which is more than the size of Christianity, jacked into your platform, and it's the default sense-making infrastructure for that entire population. So instead of it being just a product, there's a question of, is Facebook responsible for the public square? Is it responsible for Instagram teenage mental health issues when that's now the infrastructure by which children spend more hours per day in cases between Instagram and YouTube on those platforms than they do hours a day at school? Do the companies have a responsibility? Now that might sound like, well, hold on a second, business shouldn't be responsible for that. We're just building a successful business. But if you think about Saturday morning cartoons in the United States, at least, that's an example. Do Saturday morning cartoons exist in Europe? There's a notion that there's some cases. I'm hearing mixed responses.
Oh, I saw some over the weekend.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I use that metaphor because we used to regulate Saturday morning cartoons, right? We have to protect children during those hours. And then, so that's in the physical world, we protect children. Once YouTube gobbles up that experience and they virtualize it. So now YouTube is basically running the children's TV infrastructure. Do you think that they looked at your government's laws and brought up the old standards, practices, safety codes, time, manner, place restrictions, sexuality restrictions, and brought them to the virtual world? No. So in general, Mark Andreessen's quote that the issue is that technology is eating the world. Software is going to eat the world. It's going to eat each of our aspects of our lives. Facebook gobbled up elections infrastructure. In the United States, there's a law that says that on television, at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night, it should cost the same price for candidate A and candidate B to sell an ad. It shouldn't be different prices because we want it to be fair. Do you think that when Facebook gobbled up elections and it brought it into the virtual world as virtual infrastructure, it looked at that law and said, how do we bring that over there? No. So in general, what's happening is that technology is eating the world and then becoming the infrastructure of not just obviously the United States, but the entire world's election infrastructure, sense-making infrastructure, et cetera. So the metaphor is, it's like a nuclear power plant that's built everywhere. It's not like your responsibility to get a hazmat suit and a radiation kit and all that. It shouldn't be our responsibility to research every single food to see whether it's good for us. Once something becomes the infrastructure, we have to control for the consequences.
So what do we do? What's the answer?
And it seems kind of scary in a certain way, right? Because you realize that this is the infrastructure, and then you realize that it's not beholden to any of the laws, codes, safety standards, et cetera, that we have. So the first step, and this is what I said, I testified before Congress about a week and a half ago in Washington as the Consumer Protection Committee. And what I said was, one way of dealing with this when you see these vast social harms occurring in technology, vast social harms occurring to society because of technology, is let's create this new master digital regulator that's going to regulate everything. And it's like, okay, when you see that social isolation, worsening critical thinking, teen mental health issues, public health, elections, narcissism, outragification of politics, election engineering, polarization, like there's this long list of harms. It doesn't seem like one master regulator is the right way to deal with that. So just logically, it doesn't seem like, and I'm not a pro-regulation person or something like that. So what I said was, what if we had a digital update for the existing bodies in your country, in countries, where there's already someone who cares about Department of Education for children's education. There's already someone who cares about addiction. There's already someone who cares about election standards. And just applying those, asking each one of those agencies in the US, for example, to provide a digital update. So what is the way in which, let's say, the Department of Health and Human Services cared about addiction, but they don't care about addiction. They care about oxycodone, but they don't care about, say, Instagram addicting teenagers. But they could issue questions that ask the companies saying, where is addiction showing up? And the interesting thing is, for the case of Instagram, unlike alcohol or tobacco, they don't know which customers are addicted. Whereas Instagram specifically, every time you log in, we know exactly which person's addicted. We know exactly how many people are using it between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. We know exactly what percentage of users are using it more than 200 times a day.
Right.
So there's ways you can actually deal with it.
But doesn't that then get into privacy, data privacy issues? Obviously these companies know a lot about each one of us, but do I necessarily want them talking to the government about my Instagram addiction? Or my child's Instagram addiction?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. That is actually the fundamental conflict here. Is that in general, if we're so concerned about privacy, then we won't be able to know about certain harms because the companies want to keep it private. I'll give you an example with Facebook and the sort of foreign interference of election situation. One of the things that not just Russia, by the way, but many other countries have done in this sort of election. There's a global information war happening we should talk about at some point, but, which is that they go into groups, Facebook groups, and they try to radicalize people. So, for example, Russia right now has been targeting U.S. Military veteran groups. So they go in and they try to they just post news as if they're regular people saying, isn't the government horrible? They did all these endless wars, and they don't care about you. And when they do that, if Facebook doesn't, so one of the things Facebook's done, back to the privacy point, is they just switched to a model where they're encrypting group conversations. They're going to move to a model where they won't be able to know. They're throwing away the lock and key, so now conversations between the white nationalists, the groups, etc., they won't know what's going on. And that's to protect people's privacy. But actually, really, it's a move for them to avoid liability. Because now when Russia's doing all this stuff, or the conspiracy theorists are doing this stuff, or they're planning attacks, or the shooters are doing whatever, they can say, well, we threw away the lock and key.
Right.
So is that protecting privacy, or is that actually the other way? So the other thing on privacy is they had a program called Social Science Research 1 to enable more researchers to do studies on whether it's public health and addiction or fake news. And they had all these universities who could get access to Facebook's data and basically say how much fake news is there, how many people do X, Y, or Z. And they shut down the program recently because of this privacy issue. And so there's this trade where if we don't look at it, it's just going to get worse, and no one's looking, and the government's not looking, and Facebook's not looking, and Facebook's not incentivized to look. And I keep using Facebook, but it's a metaphor for all of the major companies that you would use.
Right.
And that's the issue.
Right. I mean, we've all been so concerned about privacy, but it does, as you say, result in this fundamental conflict between being able to deal with some of the harmful effects of technology and protecting our own individual privacy.
Yeah, but I want to go further because I think we focus so much on privacy when we actually don't really know what it means exactly to us that we really want to protect, because there's many different definitions of privacy. It also, based on what we've shared so far, might seem like these are just accidental byproducts, where I think it's important to establish there's a fundamental misalignment between especially the attention business model, the attention extraction business model, and the well-being of society. Because you have an infinite growth paradigm running on a finite substrate of human attention. So what happens when you have infinite growth expectations living on a finite substrate where there's only so much attention out there? It takes 9 months to grow a new human being and plug them in and increase the size of the attention economy. You are going to end up with harms because you have to get more and more aggressive. I have to outcompete the other guys. So that's what we call it, the race to the bottom of the brainstem. And what that means is that the more aggressive, outrageous, conspiracy thinking, you're under attack, the government is lying to you, those kinds of messages win when the algorithm's looking for what people click on. And so
it reinforces
that. So a few quick stats on this. Fake news spreads 6 times faster than real news on Twitter, an MIT Twitter study. The best predictor of whether someone will believe in a new conspiracy theory is whether I already have you believing in one conspiracy theory. Because basically conspiracies are like gateway drugs. They change your mind to not trust things. And so once you don't trust, for example, that the earth is flat, which is a very common one, it means that you're more likely to trust other things. So now you look at YouTube and you look at something like climate change, 50% of YouTube's recommendations on the topic of climate change, 50% of the recommendations, the sidebar on YouTube, are for climate denial or climate hoax videos. So now you ask, and we met with Ursula von der Leyen a couple nights ago, the new president of the EU Commission, and we said, if you want to do the Green New Deal, can you imagine all of Europe basically getting their information from YouTube, which is basically the new TV, and 50% of what they're getting is climate denial videos? Do you think you're going to get public agreement as a democracy and consensus? So these issues are not just, oh, we have these like accidental harms, we got to figure out the regulator. It's like, this is urgent stuff that's shaping whether we can address big problems.
So that's a sobering message for a very early morning conversation.
Sorry about that. Sorry. Good morning.
Good morning.
I
enjoy. Have a good day.
The first thing before we talk about like these sort of ideal solutions is I just want people to understand the vast scope of the power and the vast scope of the sort of oil spill of, the digital oil spill, into society. And I think that's important to establish first before we all get on the same side of the table and say, yeah, let's fix all that.
You and I have talked about this. Though. You're not a pessimist necessarily about technology, though, right? Despite what you've just said, you think it can still save us?
Well, I'm actually, and this is not a sales pitch. I'm really grateful that there are organizations like IBM trying to take AI and apply it to things like climate change, because we need everything we've got. I worry, though, about technology whose business model is misaligned with the kind of social goods in society when it's running the social goods in society. It's become the infrastructure for the social goods. So it's not about the technology, it's about the business model. And if the business model was aligned, then Facebook could be the greatest tool for healing loneliness all around the world. Like, it knows exactly who's lonely, it knows exactly who else is scrolling by themselves. It can make it never before easier to not just join someone else's event, but actually host your own cooking nights. Be like, hey, these 3 other people that are your friends are also alone right now. Do you want to host a cooking night at 5 p.m.? Do you want to go dancing tonight? Do you want to, it could be helping us to
I'm
live
not sure I want my
lives.
friends to know that part, but yeah.
No, we didn't tell you, but there's ways you could signal and say, yes, this is what I'm looking for, for more tonight. So I think that it's really the business model, and again, back to the prompt, we have Paleolithic emotions, these ancient, easily hackable emotions. We have medieval institutions, and we have godlike technology. That's the fundamental problem statement. The thing that social media got wrong is that it was not trying to protect or be really careful and tend to the way that our emotions can be hijacked. For the quick one with fake news is that affirmation feels good when someone gives you information that confirms what you already believe. Like, yeah, that guy, I didn't like that politician, I knew he was awful. Right? If it confirms that, it feels good. If it tells you something opposite to what you believe, it doesn't feel good. So because it's not caring about what's true, it just cares about what gets you clicking, it just keeps you going down the filter bubble.
So we're about to talk with some leading executives from major companies. Briefly, what's the one thing that you would ask them to be thinking about as they think about how technology powers their particular enterprise?
The one thing that I would pay attention to is if you just go back to Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, meaning our institutions update every 4 or 5 years, and then accelerating godlike technology. Can you have the makers of technology not care about the social fabric or society if it's going way faster than your medieval institution is going to catch up? Like, if you have godlike powers and you don't care about what's good for people, you're going to accidentally break something, because the government's not going to make sure and set the guardrails in advance. So it imposes a kind of new notion of responsibility, where kind of all of technology is now, all technology companies are kind of infrastructure that need to have some notion of responsibility. And I think consumers are going to look for that. I think the companies that speak in terms of the notion of we're responsible as we build these new things, whether that's diversity and inclusion or non-bias in AI or climate-related initiatives. So I think that it just speaks to the fact that you need to actually have a culture of responsibility and embodying responsibility. I think that starts at the top with leadership. Because even if you get the right law passed, it'll always happen 4 or 5 years behind what you need to have.
Right. Okay, well, thank you, Tristan. That's a great way to set up our next conversation.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.